Rebecca was a devoted nurse, the unwavering pillar of support for her family, and the sole provider in a life filled with unrelenting challenges. Not only did she carry the heavy burden of her family's struggles, but she also endured the quiet hostility of her workplace. Among her colleagues was Clarissa, a woman whose inner turmoil festered into jealousy and resentment whenever Rebecca received praise. Clarissa's discontent was a constant unspoken presence, intensifying the daily pressures that Rebecca already faced. One fateful day, the hospital where Rebecca dedicated her life received an unexpected visitor, a distinguished millionaire known as Mr. Harrington. His reputation for an explosive temper had long kept the other nurses at a distance, but when fate assigned him to Rebecca's care, her natural warmth and empathy quickly won him over. Despite his formidable nature, Mr. Harrington was touched by Rebecca's gentle concern, and he soon began to confide in her his deepest wishes. In a moment of vulnerable sincerity, Mr. Harrington made an unusual request. He asked Rebecca to assume the role of his daughter, for just one day, a final, heartfelt act of connection before his time came to an end. This peculiar plea, laden with emotion and unfulfilled dreams, struck a chord deep within Rebecca. Caught between the intensity of her own hardships and the tender appeal of his request, she found herself at a crossroads. How could she, already burdened by life's ceaseless struggles, find the strength to embrace this role? Would this act of compassion perhaps offer her a glimpse of hope amid the relentless trials she faced? In a narrative woven by Mr. Sterling, the acclaimed storyteller of true-life sagas, this poignant encounter was set to redefine the contours of her destiny. As night descended, Rebecca stepped out of the hospital into a cold, indifferent evening. The sky was a vast expanse of inky darkness, pierced only by the muted glow of street lamps that cast long shadows on the deserted sidewalks. It was nearly 11 o'clock, yet her night was far from over. The chill in the air mirrored the weariness that clung to her every step, a reminder that rest was a luxury she could scarcely afford. She hurried to catch the bus that would take her to the cramped room she rented in an old apartment building on the outskirts of a downtrodden neighborhood. For nearly 3 years, she had poured her heart into her work at a private hospital, enduring marathon shifts that stretched well over 12 hours. At the bus stop, she took a brief moment to call her mother, seeking a sliver of comfort amid the isolation of the night. "Rebecca, my dear, what troubles you this evening?" her mother asked gently when the call was answered. The familiar tender voice brought a momentary smile to Rebecca's tired face, despite the fatigue that weighed on her like an anchor. Amid soft coughs and reassurances, her mother mentioned that her siblings were already asleep and expressed gratitude for the money sent last week, which had helped cover their tuition fees. Though Rebecca's most recent paycheck had barely sufficed, she promised to make up for it with the next salary. "Remember, my child, do not exhaust yourself completely," her mother cautioned with concern. Rebecca, determined yet conflicted, kept the full extent of her struggles hidden. She shifted the conversation, asking after Evan and his partner, a topic that, while painful, seemed less overwhelming than her own personal trials. Her mother's tone darkened as she recounted that Evan's partner's family was insistent on a swift marriage, made all the more complicated by an unplanned pregnancy. The delicate balance of financial hardship and familial duty weighed heavily on their hearts. After hanging up the phone, Rebecca drew a deep, steadying breath. The conversation was a bitter reminder of the myriad responsibilities and unyielding expectations that defined her life. Climbing aboard the bus, she silently repeated her own mantra, the fervent hope of a better future for her loved ones, which kept her going despite the weariness of her body and soul. Arriving at her modest apartment, Rebecca's exhaustion deepened as she confronted an unexpected sight. Her rented room, once a small sanctuary, now stood as a barrier between her and a temporary reprieve. The door was not ajar, but was instead bound by heavy chains and a stubborn padlock. Confusion and anxiety surged within her as she rushed to the adjacent door of her landlord, Mrs. Preston, a plump, bespectacled woman renowned for her love of gaudy trinkets and her strict business sense. Despite Rebecca's persistent knocking, there was no immediate response. Finally, Mrs. Preston emerged, balancing a fork with remnants of a hastily eaten hot dog. "What is it now?" she snapped, clearly irritated by the interruption to her dinner. In a trembling voice, Rebecca demanded an explanation for the chained door. With a heavy sigh and a dismissive roll of her eyes, Mrs. Preston reminded her that the rent had not been paid for 3 long months. a fact that Rebecca had desperately tried to postpone while sending money to her family. Desperation laced Rebecca's plea as she begged for just one more week of grace, promising that her next paycheck would settle the overdue amount. But Mrs. Preston's reply was as cold as the winter night. "I'm not running a charity, Rebecca. All your belongings are now left in the hallway, and if they remain here by tomorrow morning, I will dispose of them without hesitation." The harshness of the words stung, leaving Rebecca feeling utterly abandoned and overwhelmed. Outside, under the pale glow of a solitary street lamp, Rebecca surveyed her meager possessions: a worn suitcase, a bag of clothes, a small pillow, a thin blanket, and a modest mattress. Scattered on the cold pavement, the sight of her life reduced to these few items nearly broke her spirit. With a heavy heart, she gathered her things and placed them in a precarious arrangement on the sidewalk, each item a testament to her struggle and resilience. In the depths of despair, a single thought emerged to guide her through the night: her dear friend Emma, a fellow nurse who had always been a beacon of kindness. Without delay, Rebecca dialed Emma's number, her voice wavering with desperation as she explained her plight. Answering in a soft, drowsy tone, Emma's concern was immediate, and she assured Rebecca that she would come to her aid. Emma promised, "Stay where you are. I'll have my father, Mr. Lewis, come over and pick you up right away." Within half an hour, the familiar rumble of an old pickup truck broke the oppressive silence. Emma and her father arrived to rescue Rebecca, enveloping her in warm embraces and reassuring words. Together, they loaded her sparse belongings into the truck and drove through the dark, quiet streets toward a modest dwelling. A small house constructed of wood and sheet metal that Emma's family called home. Inside, a gentle chaos reigned. 3 children slept soundly in the living area on thin mattresses, and Emma guided Rebecca to a modest room where she could finally rest. Though the accommodations were simple, a single electric fan provided the only semblance of comfort. Rebecca felt a surge of relief and gratitude. Emma's family welcomed her with open arms. Mr. Lewis greeted her with kind smiles, and Mrs. Lacey, busy managing a small convenience store, ensured that a warm breakfast would be waiting. In the quiet hours that followed, as Rebecca lay on a modest bed, her heart slowly began to mend. The challenges of the day, the unconventional request from Mr. Harrington, the harsh eviction, the loneliness of a cold, unforgiving city, merged into a single, transformative moment. Despite the overwhelming darkness, the tender compassion of a true friend reminded her that hope could still be found, even in the bleakest moments. This is Mr. Sterling once again, inviting you to listen to another extraordinary true-life story, a tale of resilience, compassion, and the enduring strength found in human connection. Isabella had always found solace in the warm, familial chaos of Sophie's household. Even Sophie's 3 younger siblings adored her, with little Oliver, the youngest, exhibiting playful antics that brightened Isabella's long, arduous days. Despite having known Sophie for only 2 short years, Isabella felt their bond was forged over a lifetime of shared experiences. They had first crossed paths as fresh-faced nurses assigned to the same busy ward, where every new task felt overwhelming and every moment a learning curve. On her very first day, Isabella recalled, she had been engulfed by the dizzying pace of hospital life, barely grasping the responsibilities laid before her. It was Sophie who noticed her palpable distress and extended a comforting hand. With her ever-cheerful disposition and an air of unyielding optimism, Sophie eased Isabella into the rhythm of their demanding roles. In the days that followed, their friendship blossomed, during shared coffee breaks, modest meals purchased on a tight budget, and even during the grueling commutes home when their shifts coincided. The hospital was a battlefield of endless tasks, yet Isabella found a ray of hope in Sophie's unwavering support. However, not all in the hospital shared this camaraderie. The presence of colleagues with sour dispositions added to the daily challenges. Among them was Victoria, a fellow nurse who exuded arrogance and wielded her authority like a weapon, partly due to her familial connection. Her aunt was the revered head nurse of the department. Victoria's haughty behavior was evident in every interaction, often making those around her, especially Isabella, feel small and insignificant. One night, as Isabella entered the bustling nurses' station, Victoria's icy greeting was unmistakable. "Ah, you've finally graced us with your presence," Victoria sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "I was beginning to think you'd quit, considering you haven't managed to pay your rent for months." "Don't be surprised, I hear all about it," This hospital is nothing but a den of idle gossip." Despite the glaring attention from other staff, Isabella clutched her logbook and pen tightly, choosing to ignore the venomous remark. Victoria's words stung, but she was accustomed to such barbs. The animosity seemed to have taken root ever since Victoria had developed an unreciprocated infatuation with a male nurse who had shown interest in Isabella, a misunderstanding that left Victoria embittered, though nothing had truly transpired. Resigned to the constant undercurrent of hostility, Isabella dedicated herself to her rounds, diligently checking on her patients, while grappling with the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. During one such busy shift, as Isabella recorded a patient's vital signs, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Turning around, she found Sophie standing there, her eyes filled with concern. "Bella, did Victoria give you another hard time?" she whispered softly. "Yes, but it's become routine," Isabella replied with a tired shrug, dismissing the comment as if it were merely a part of the daily grind. Sophie, ever the candid friend, remarked, "Clearly, she's bitter because Patrick showed interest in you instead of her." Their quiet exchange was abruptly interrupted by Victoria's sharp voice. "What are you two murmuring about? Are you calling me bitter?" she snapped, emerging from behind them with arms crossed and an expectant glare. Sophie, unfazed by Victoria's presence, responded with a playful smirk. "Oh, Victoria, forgive our oversight. Perhaps you'd like to run off and report us to your dear aunt." Her teasing words only deepened Victoria's frown, but Isabella intervened quietly. "As long as we're doing our jobs well, nothing should endanger us." With a final glare that betrayed simmering fury, Victoria stormed off, leaving the duo to return to their duties. Later that morning, after completing their night shift, Isabella and Sophie found themselves alone in the staff locker room. The quiet hum of the air conditioner was a stark contrast to the chaos of the hospital. Just as Isabella was about to leave, her phone rang, displaying a call from her mother. "Hello, Mom, is everything all right?" Isabella answered, her voice gentle yet weary. On the other end, her mother's tone was laced with urgency and a hint of embarrassment. "Bella, I'm sorry to call so late. I know you just finished your shift, but could you possibly send some money today? Your brother's girlfriend needs a checkup she's expecting, and her condition worries me." Isabella's heart sank. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to muster the strength to reassure her mother. "Mom, I'm really strapped for cash right now, but I promise I'll find a way," she said softly. Her mother's gratitude was palpable through the phone, as she apologized repeatedly for burdening her daughter, knowing there was no one else to rely on. With a heavy sigh, Isabella assured her, "I'll send it later today. Take care, Mom," before ending the call and sinking onto a nearby bench, her head heavy with anxiety. Sophie soon returned to the room, noticing the forlorn look on Isabella's face. "Bella, you look utterly drained," she observed with genuine concern. Isabella explained in a hushed tone, "It's Mom. She needs money for my brother's girlfriend's checkup." Without a moment's hesitation, Sophie rummaged through her bag, producing her wallet and offering Isabella some cash. "Take this," she said firmly. Shocked, Isabella attempted to protest. "Sophie, I can't accept this. I haven't even repaid you yet. I should borrow from someone else." But Sophie's insistence was unwavering. "With others, you might have to pay interest. With me, there are no such worries. I know you can't abandon your family. Please, just accept this." Grateful tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she clutched the money, whispering, "Thank you so much, Sophie." After their lunch shift, the atmosphere turned tense. In the locker room, colleagues gathered around a tearful, injured Victoria, whose bitter outburst echoed through the halls. Later, assigned to deliver important documents, Isabella encountered a frail, elderly gentleman struggling in a private room. Instinctively, she rushed to his aid, offering gentle assistance and care with quiet, steadfast determination. Nurse Rebecca was in the midst of her busy shift when she encountered a rather grumbling patient, Mr. Douglas, who muttered, "I just need to use the bathroom." With her gentle professionalism intact, she replied, "I'll come with you. I'm a nurse." Mr. Douglas's eyes twinkled with a mix of defiance and humor as he remarked, "I know you're a nurse. I can tell by your uniform." Though his tone was curt, Rebecca found his comment rather amusing and managed a warm smile, knowing that humor was often the balm for harsh words. Guiding him slowly down the corridor, Rebecca led Mr. Douglas to the hospital's small yet elegant restroom, Along the way, she noted how the interior of the room stood in stark contrast to the utilitarian hallways. Plush chairs lined the waiting area, a refined clock with an ornate design adorned the bedside table, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of unexpected luxury. Upon reaching the bathroom, Mr. Douglas continued his grumbling in a low voice. Yet, he did not resist her assistance. Once he had finished, Rebecca patiently waited outside the door, reflecting on the incongruity between his apparent irascibility and the refined surroundings. A few minutes later, Mr. Douglas emerged, looking slightly more composed. Rebecca helped him back to his bed, ensuring that every detail of his comfort was attended to. As she arranged the blankets around him and adjusted his pillows, she asked in a courteous tone, "Is there anything else I can do for you, sir?" His eyes softened for just a moment as he replied, "Raise the window blinds. I want to see outside." Slowly, Rebecca drew the blinds open, allowing the morning sunlight to pour into the room and reveal the hospital's serene garden, where a few patients and visitors strolled peacefully. Mr. Douglas gazed out the window, his eyes clouded with a sorrowful resignation as he murmured, "They're lucky. They can walk without a care in the world, while I can't even manage that simple act. It makes me feel so worthless." His quiet voice, laden with sadness, stirred a deep compassion within Rebecca. Gently, she reassured him, "Sir, your worth is not measured by your physical strength. Every person experiences seasons of strength and seasons of frailty. These moments do not diminish your value." Mr. Douglas grumbled back, "So you're saying I'm just old?" Teasingly, though his feigned anger betrayed his vulnerability, Rebecca laughed softly, replying, "I didn't say that. It was your own words, sir." The old man fell silent once more, watching the world outside with a melancholic gaze, and after a few moments, Rebecca excused herself, explaining that she had other duties to attend to. Before leaving, Mr. Douglas called out, "What's your name?" and Rebecca introduced herself warmly. With that, she returned to her routine, but not without carrying the heavy sadness of his eyes with her throughout the day. Later that day, as Rebecca walked along the hospital's bustling corridor, she noticed her close friend and colleague Emily moving slowly with her head hung low. Quickening her pace, Rebecca caught up with her, only to find Emily in tears. "Em, what's wrong?" Rebecca asked, placing a comforting hand on Emily's arm. After a shaky breath, Emily confided, "I was assigned to Mr. Hamilton this morning." Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and hurt. "Did he scold you? Did he hurt you?" Rebecca inquired, her concern mounting. Emily wiped away her tears and replied, "He cursed me out, calling me horrible names, as if my own parents would ever speak to me like that." Anger laced Emily's words as she added, "Who does he think he is?" explaining that after serving him breakfast, he had berated her simply because the milk was not cold enough, as though it were a personal slight. The injustice of it all left Emily feeling diminished, as if her professional competence was being trampled upon. Rebecca sighed deeply, her heart aching for her friend. "He treated you as if you were worthless, and that is simply unacceptable," she murmured. Emily's frustration was evident, and Rebecca's own fears began to stir. If a man of such imposing temperament could so easily belittle someone as steadfast as Emily, what fate awaited her if ever assigned to his care? Despite these misgivings, Rebecca reminded herself that nursing was far more than a mere job. It was a calling, a sacred responsibility to care for those in need, regardless of their demeanor. That afternoon, while taking a brief respite in the cafeteria and sipping cold water from her tumbler, Rebecca's cell phone rang. Recognizing her mother's name on the caller ID, she answered promptly with a cheerful, "Hi, Mom." However, her mother's voice, laden with worry, quickly dispelled any sense of normalcy. "Rebecca, I hate to trouble you again, but my prescription has run out, and I'm not feeling well," her mother admitted softly. Rebecca's heart sank in empathy. "Mom, you should have told me sooner. Never hesitate to call." "I'm always here for you," she replied kindly. After a moment of silence, her mother continued, "I feel so guilty for asking for money so often. You work so hard, and you are the only one we have." Rebecca's mind flashed back to the sacrifices her parents had made for her education and career. The late nights of studying, the tearful farewells when her father passed away. "Mom, please don't feel bad. I wouldn't be where I am without the sacrifices you and Dad made. I promised him I'd take care of you and my siblings," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, my dear. I'm so lucky to have you," her mother replied, trembling with gratitude. Rebecca assured her, I'll send money first thing tomorrow. Please remember to take your medicine." After exchanging tender farewells, Rebecca hung up, her eyes lingering on her hands, the very hands that cared for countless patients, yet struggled to support her family. The next morning, as Rebecca and Emily arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere was charged with urgency. The air was filled with the hum of intercom calls and hurried footsteps, while the sterile scent of antiseptics lingered. As they made their way to the ward, a senior nurse named Leah approached them with an urgent tone. "Rebecca, Ms. Carter is requesting you in her office on the 4th floor," Leah announced. Miss Carter, known for her stern authority and as Victoria's aunt, had a reputation for being uncompromising. "Why?" Rebecca asked, exchanging a worried glance with Emily. "I'm not entirely sure," Leah replied. "Just go see her immediately." Anxiety prickled at Rebecca's skin as Emily whispered, "I bet it's about being assigned to Mr. Hamilton. That happened to me before." A surge of dread coursed through Rebecca. She inhaled deeply, took one slow breath after another, and rode the elevator to the head nurse's office, praying silently that she would not be forced into a role that had already shaken her friend. Inside, Miss Carter's gaze was steely as she flipped through a file before stating plainly, "I am transferring you immediately. You will be Mr. Hamilton's nurse." Rebecca's heart pounded as she protested softly, "Please, is there anyone else? I've heard so many troubling stories about him. I'm frightened." But Miss Carter's tone was unyielding. "He specifically requested you, and there is no alternative." With a trembling hand, Rebecca accepted the file detailing Mr. Hamilton's condition. 76 years old with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, suffering from severe pain, weakness, and weight loss, now receiving only palliative care. Overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, Rebecca's pulse raced as she walked to Mr. Hamilton's room. Despite her fears, compassion urged her forward. When she opened the door, she saw Mr. Hamilton lying frail, hooked up to an IV, his eyes meeting hers with a spark of recognition. "It's you," he exclaimed, recalling her earlier assistance with the bathroom. "I asked for you specifically. Did you think I'd forget your name?" he retorted sharply. Rebecca introduced herself once more, her voice steady as she began her careful routine of checking his vital signs and ensuring his comfort. Throughout the day, Mr. Hamilton's demeanor was subdued. He neither cursed nor lashed out, and Rebecca found that, contrary to the rumors, he was distant but not overtly hostile. As she finished her tasks and prepared to leave, she assured him, "I'll be just outside if you need anything." Later, when she met Emily after their shift, the shock and relief on Emily's face were unmistakable as she peppered Rebecca with questions. "Oh my goodness, you survived! Did he curse at you, hit you, kick you?" Emily asked, clutching Rebecca's arm with wide eyes. Rebecca's response was measured, and though her mind was still reeling from the day's events, she recognized that her duty was clear despite the fears that had haunted her. Nurse Rebecca let out a soft chuckle as she recounted the events of the day, her voice calm despite the lingering tension. "Calm down," she murmured to herself, recalling how, despite the harsh words, Mr. Harrington had not hurled curses at her. "No, he didn't curse at me," she repeated, with a wry smile. Later that day, as she and her friend Sophie exchanged whispered reflections in the quiet corridor, Rebecca explained in a measured tone, "He didn't touch me. He was cold, distant. But that was all." Sophie, ever the playful skeptic, teased, "Are you sure? Maybe he's just softening you up before he attacks." Rebecca rolled her eyes, her smile gentle as she replied, "He does seem grouchy, but I believe he's just burdened by too much pain. He's ill and life has been terribly unfair to him lately." Rebecca's compassion for Mr. Harrington was evident in every word. "Honestly, I feel a twinge of sorrow for him," she confided. "Frustration and constant pain can drive a person to lash out in the only way they know how." Sophie shot her a doubtful glance. "You're too kind, Rebecca. I do hope it stays that way for you. But to be honest, I was terrified of him at first," she admitted, her voice trembling with the memory of that first intimidating encounter. Rebecca nodded slowly, her mind revisiting the unanswered question of why Mr. Harrington had so insistently requested her as his nurse. Day after day, she found herself consistently assigned to his care. Although he sometimes snapped or spoke harshly, she never took his anger personally. Instead, she reminded herself that, beneath his gruff exterior, lay a man overwhelmed by pain and isolation. Every measured dose of medication, every careful adjustment of his IV, and every soft-spoken word was a small act of kindness meant to alleviate his suffering. One crisp morning, as Rebecca walked to work through the bustling streets near St. Mercy Hospital, she passed a small florist's stall. The vivid colors of the bouquets caught her eye, and a thought struck her. Despite the wealth and prominence Mr. Harrington once wielded, not a single visitor had ever brought him a token of affection. Unlike other patients who received regular visits and thoughtful gifts, he remained isolated, his only company the sterile routine of the hospital. Moved by an impulse of empathy, she decided then and there to purchase a bouquet of vibrant orange tulips. Later, in the quiet solitude of his room, Mr. Harrington sat slumped against a pile of soft pillows, his gaze fixed listlessly on the window. Rebecca stepped inside and carefully placed the freshly bought tulips into a vase on the bedside table. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said brightly, hoping her gentle greeting might brighten the somber room. For a long moment he said nothing, his eyes slowly drifting towards the blooms. Then, as if overwhelmed by the delicate beauty of the flowers, tears began to glisten in his eyes. Sensing his fragile state, Rebecca discreetly changed the subject, offering him the space he needed to gather his thoughts. On another morning, however, the atmosphere in his room was markedly different. When Rebecca entered with a tray carrying his prescribed medications, she immediately sensed an unusual heaviness in the air. Before she could utter a word of greeting, Mr. Harrington abruptly swatted the tray aside. "I don't need those," he snapped bitterly, his voice echoing through the room as small packages of pills scattered across the floor and water splashed onto the bed. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained a composed exterior. As she knelt to collect the scattered medications, Mr. Harrington's voice broke through the silence, raw and anguished. "What's the point of taking these medicines? I know I'm going to die soon, perhaps only a few months left. I'm just making myself suffer." Rebecca paused, her eyes meeting his, and saw not pure anger but a deep-seated mixture of exhaustion, fear, and loneliness. Slowly, she inched closer until she sat on the edge of his bed, her tone soft and reassuring. "Mr. Harrington, I know it's incredibly hard," she began gently. "I understand that you're tired, in pain, and frightened. None of us can truly know how much time we have left. But one thing is clear, as long as you wake up each day, there is a purpose in your life." Her words, though simple, carried a depth of sincerity that seemed to resonate in the quiet room. "I can't take away your pain, but I want you to know that you're not alone." A long silence fell, heavy with emotion, as if Mr. Harrington were mulling over every word. Rebecca sensed that, even if his outlook wouldn't change overnight, he had absorbed something vital, an affirmation of his worth. Gently, she gathered the scattered pills, set them neatly back on his tray, and assured him, "I'll bring you a fresh set of medications." When she returned moments later with a new glass of water and the replacement pills, Mr. Harrington accepted them quietly, swallowing them without protest. Though no words were exchanged, a small, almost imperceptible smile flickered on Rebecca's face. She knew that, little by little, she was beginning to mend the fractures in his heart. That very afternoon, as Rebecca continued to tend to Mr. Harrington's needs, she noticed a profound change in his demeanor. Gone was the perpetual scowl and bitter mutter. Instead, he appeared pensive, gazing out of the window as the sun set in a blaze of soft, dying light. Seizing the moment to break the silence, Rebecca remarked, "That view outside is beautiful, isn't it, Mr. Harrington?" She adjusted his pillows with care, drawing his attention to the magnificent sunset. Slowly he turned his head, a wistful smile emerging as he confessed, "I haven't paid attention to such beauty for a very long time. Ever since I learned I was dying, I stopped noticing the simple pleasures in life." "Why is that?" Rebecca inquired softly, genuinely curious. "The sunset today is truly breathtaking." Mr. Harrington's eyes grew distant as he replied, "Before my illness, I was consumed by work, by business and wealth. I never stopped to appreciate moments like these because I was too busy. Now, all that seems pointless." His voice was laden with regret as he continued, "I lost my daughter, my only child, because I wasn't there for her. I chose work over her, and I never got to hold her hand during her final moments." His confession trembled in the air, and Rebecca felt an overwhelming sorrow for the pain he had endured. She listened in silence as he recounted how his wife had left him afterward, blaming him for their daughter's untimely death, a mistake he believed might have been avoided if only he had been present. "Now," he murmured, voice breaking, "I find myself alone and feeble. I might have all the money in the world, but it means nothing without love." Overwhelmed by his anguish, Mr. Harrington choked on his words, and Rebecca gently took his hand. "Sir, I know you cannot change the past, but your life still holds meaning. Sometimes, in our pursuit of wealth, we forget that true happiness lies in love, compassion, and the simple acts of care." Mr. Harrington's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he listened. "I've never heard anyone speak to me like that before," he whispered. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that hinted at a rekindled hope. In the days that followed, the transformation was gradual yet unmistakable. The once gruff, bitter man began to show signs of levity. Occasionally, he even exchanged light-hearted banter with Rebecca and the other nurses, remarking one morning, "I never thought I could laugh again." Rebecca's heart swelled with relief as she replied, "There's so much beauty in life, and it's a tragedy to dwell solely on sorrow." During one quiet moment, as Mr. Harrington asked Rebecca about her own life, she recounted her struggles as the eldest of 4 siblings, the challenges of being the sole provider after her father's passing, and the relentless battle to keep her family afloat. Mr. Harrington listened intently, his eyes softening with empathy. "People like you," he commented, "who put family before everything, often find that the greatest blessings are yet to come. But do take care of yourself too. Life is not only about sacrifice." Rebecca nodded, absorbing his words of wisdom. The conversation left a lingering warmth, a shared understanding that even amidst pain and loss, hope could still flourish. Nurse Rebecca often reminded herself to care for her own happiness while ensuring that her family's needs were met. "Find things that bring you joy," Mr. Harrington would say in his own broken way, not just as a provider but as a person. His gentle advice, offered in moments of rare vulnerability, filled Rebecca with a warm glow. In that instant, she realized that her role extended far beyond mere nursing. She had become a cherished confidant and even a surrogate daughter to this once unyielding man. One radiant afternoon, while Mr. Harrington slept soundly, Rebecca busied herself tidying his modest belongings. The soft rustle of sheets and the careful arrangement of his few personal items filled the quiet room. Before long, Miss Carter, the stern yet kind head nurse, entered with an unusually broad smile. "Rebecca, I have something to tell you," she announced, her tone light and full of admiration. Rebecca paused, setting aside the neatly folded blanket, her heart quickening with nervous anticipation. "What is it, ma'am?" she asked softly. "You've become the talk of the hospital," Miss Carter declared, her eyes sparkling with genuine pride. "Everyone is in awe of how you've managed to reach Mr. Harrington's heart. You're the only nurse who's been able to melt the once gruff patient's icy demeanor." Rebecca blushed and replied modestly, "I was just doing my job." Yet Miss Carter was insistent. "No, Rebecca, you did so much more than that. You didn't simply administer his medication or change his IV. You transformed his entire outlook. That is the essence of true nursing." Before they could continue, Sophie, Rebecca's ever-cheerful friend and colleague, burst into the room beaming. "Rebecca, you're famous now. The doctors and nurses can't stop talking about you," she teased playfully, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Rebecca laughed, shaking her head at the exaggeration. "Oh, Sophie, you're exaggerating," she insisted, though the light in her eyes betrayed her joy. "But really, I'm just glad I could help him feel a bit less alone." As if on cue, Mr. Harrington stirred and called out, "What are you all whispering about over there?" His voice, though gruff, now carried a hint of amusement. Rebecca quickly responded, "Oh, sorry if we disturbed you, sir. We were just admiring how much friendlier you've become." Mr. Harrington's face softened into a gentle grin as he replied, "Well, of course I'm happier when I have Rebecca here treating me like family." Sophie chimed in, "See? Even Mr. Harrington thinks you're amazing." Turning to him, Rebecca added, "You know, it's not just me who's changed. You've changed me as well. I'll cherish your wisdom forever, sir." Overcome with emotion, tears welled in her eyes, and she couldn't help but cry. In that tender moment, the bond between them transcended the typical nurse-patient relationship. It was genuine, familial. Later, during a quiet lunch in the cafeteria, Rebecca and Sophie relaxed and chatted about the day's events and the peculiar yet heartwarming drama that unfolded within the hospital walls. "You know, if I weren't a nurse, I might have become an actress," Sophie joked, biting into her sandwich as if the hospital life were a never-ending soap opera. Rebecca laughed in response, adding, "Despite all the drama, Being a nurse is incredibly rewarding. Their banter was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Tiffany, a colleague whose cutting remarks had once threatened to dampen Rebecca's spirits. Tiffany slid into the seat across from Rebecca, her gaze cold and taunting. "You seem awfully cheerful these days, Rebecca. How did you manage to charm Mr. Harrington so quickly?" she sneered. "Tell me, what's your secret?" Before Rebecca could reply, Sophie's protective tone rang out. "Tiffany, if you're here to cause trouble, just leave us be and let the good vibes remain," she warned sharply. Tiffany's smirk deepened, and with a suggestive tone, she continued, "I'm just saying, it's strange how one day he's the grouchiest patient, and the next he's practically putty in your hands." The atmosphere in the cafeteria turned tense. Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she met Tiffany's gaze with steely determination. "I don't need to justify my actions to you, Tiffany," Rebecca said firmly. "I've done my job with care and integrity. Unlike you, I took the time to understand Mr. Harrington's needs." Tiffany muttered a dismissive retort and turned away, leaving a heavy silence behind. Sophie squeezed Rebecca's hand. "Don't let her words get to you. She'll never be happy for your success." Rebecca nodded, taking several deep gulps of water to steady herself. She resolved not to allow Tiffany's baseless accusations to darken her day. Early the following morning, Rebecca made her way to Mr. Harrington's room with her tray of medications in hand. The old man was already awake, sitting by the window and lost in thought. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," Rebecca greeted cheerfully as she set the tray on the bedside table. He acknowledged her presence with a faint smile and reached out to receive his pills, which he swallowed without hesitation. As he leaned back in bed, he called out, "Rebecca, could you fetch my wallet from the drawer?" Without a word, Rebecca opened the small nightstand drawer and retrieved a worn black leather wallet. Mr. Harrington carefully opened it and, with deliberate care, removed an old, faded photograph. "This is my daughter," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret as he showed the picture to Rebecca. The photograph revealed a little girl with a round, cherubic face and bright, lively eyes. "Your daughter was beautiful," Rebecca said softly, her heart aching with empathy. Mr. Harrington sighed deeply, confessing, "I regret never spending enough time with her. I was too caught up in my work, too busy to be there when she needed me." His voice cracked as he continued, "I hope that when I finally leave this world, I'll see her again in heaven." Rebecca immediately grasped his despair and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Mr. Harrington, you still have time. Please don't lose hope. Miracles do happen, even when everything seems impossible. God can." For a moment, he fell silent before replying with quiet acceptance. "Thank you, Rebecca, but I know my time is near. I'm old, tired, and no longer afraid of dying. Yet there is one final request I must ask of you." Rebecca's heart pounded as she steadied herself. "What is it, sir?" she inquired, her voice trembling with anticipation. With tears gathering in his eyes, Mr. Harrington made his heartfelt plea. "For one day, will you pretend to be my daughter? I long to experience what it feels like to be a father again before I go," he added, his voice choked with emotion. "And if I could have a daughter, I'd choose you." Shocked beyond words, Rebecca hesitated, but quickly regained her composure. "There's no need for payment, sir," she replied softly. "A daughter's love isn't something you can buy. Even if we aren't related by blood, there is no price for the bond we share." Mr. Harrington's expression softened into one of deep gratitude as he gently replaced the photograph in his wallet, wiping away tears. Though he said nothing further, Rebecca sensed the profound thankfulness in his silent gaze. Later that day, Rebecca approached Dr. Roberts, a kindly, respected senior physician, and explained Mr. Harrington's desperate wish to be discharged for one day. "Doc, just one day. I want to take Mr. Harrington somewhere meaningful. We'll return before nightfall," she pleaded earnestly. Though initially hesitant due to his frail condition, Dr. Roberts relented after considering Rebecca's determined plea. Soon, Mr. Harrington was cleared for a brief outing. Dressed in comfortable clothes, he waited beside one of the hospital's sleek SUVs as Rebecca helped him climb in. Their first stop was a small park near a gently flowing river. As they stepped out, Mr. Harrington's eyes lit up at the sight of lush greenery and the playful splash of water. "My daughter and I used to come here often," he recalled with a wistful smile. "We'd have picnics and float little paper boats in the stream." Standing by the water's edge, Rebecca watched as a few children played nearby, their laughter mingling with the soft murmur of the river. With each careful step, Mr. Harrington's memories unfurled, and Rebecca felt privileged to help him relive moments of tender joy. They later visited a quaint ice cream parlor, where Mr. Harrington reminisced. "I used to bring her here whenever she craved something sweet." As they sat by the window, Mr. Harrington's breathing grew heavier, and Rebecca gently asked, "Dad, are you all right?" Hearing him refer to her with that endearing term, he replied, "I'm fine, dear. Actually, I'm happy to hear you call me that. It fills a part of the emptiness I've long felt." Nurse Rebecca listened as Mr. Harrington's voice softened, a bittersweet smile gracing his weathered face as he recalled the memory of losing his daughter. "Losing my daughter," he murmured, his tone a mixture of sorrow and a quiet acceptance. Later, as they sat together in an ice cream parlor, their conversation turned tender. With each bite of the sweet treat, Mr. Harrington reminisced about the joyful moments he once shared with his daughter. Rebecca sat attentively, careful not to linger on his painful illness, instead choosing to cherish the warmth of his recollections. After the ice cream, their day unfolded like a gentle voyage through memories. They strolled into a cozy bookstore, a place that had once been his daughter's refuge. "How about you, Rebecca? Do you still enjoy reading?" Mr. Harrington inquired with genuine curiosity. She smiled wistfully. "Once upon a time, yes, but these days I hardly find a moment." His eyes twinkled as he offered her a small gift, a book he wished to present to her as a memento of their day together. "Would you like a book, dear?" he asked softly. Rebecca hesitated at first, but before she could protest, he interjected firmly, "I want to give you this gift. I want you to remember this day." After browsing the shelves with Rebecca by his side, he carefully selected a title and purchased it. At the checkout, he took a pen and, with deliberate care, wrote a note on the inside cover. "For Rebecca, my child who brought light back into my life." The tender inscription moved Rebecca deeply, and though she tried to hide the tears welling in her eyes, she couldn't help but feel the profound significance of his gesture. Their journey continued as they ventured into a bustling shopping mall. Rebecca assumed they might simply stop for a meal, yet Mr. Harrington led her into an upscale clothing store. "Pick out anything you like," he insisted with a gentle authority that echoed the fatherly role he cherished in that moment. Rebecca protested softly, "Dad, I don't need expensive clothes," but he was insistent. "Don't argue, dear. It's been so long since I had the chance to shop with a daughter. Let me experience it once more." Relenting, Rebecca chose a simple floral dress, though Mr. Harrington encouraged her to select additional items, a bag, a pair of shoes, reminding her of the carefree days of youth. At the checkout counter, his eyes shone with delight as he watched her choose each item, as if each purchase restored a piece of the past. For a fleeting moment, he seemed to travel back in time to days filled with laughter and lightheartedness. When evening drew near, they returned to the hospital in a sleek SUV. In the quiet car ride, Rebecca gazed out the window, feeling the day's joyful hours slip away too quickly. Just that morning, they had wandered through a park, laughed together over ice cream, and even shopped for new clothes. Now, the vibrant memories were already turning into tender recollections. Glancing at Mr. Harrington, she noticed his breathing had grown shallow. He smiled at her with half-closed eyes, and softly she whispered, "Dad." "Yes, my dear," he replied, his voice imbued with both weariness and gratitude. "Are you happy, sir?" she asked, her tone gentle as she fought back the ache in her heart. With a smile that carried decades of longing and fulfillment, he answered, "More than you know, dear. I've waited so long for a day like this. I never thought I'd feel it again. Thank you, Rebecca." His words resonated deeply, and though tears threatened to spill over, she returned his smile, cherishing every moment of this unexpected father-daughter bond. Back at the hospital, a few nurses greeted them as Rebecca helped Mr. Harrington disembark from the SUV. Guiding him back to his room, she meticulously fixed his bed, her every movement laden with a bittersweet awareness that soon, reality would reclaim him, just as it had taken her own father so many years ago. When the task was complete, she gently said, "Dad, you can lie down now. I'll be leaving shortly." Before departing, Mr. Harrington grasped her hands with surprising tenderness. "Thank you for today, my child. I'll never forget it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Overwhelmed, Rebecca clung to his hands, her heart heavy with the impending loss. "I don't know how I can ever repay you, Dad," she murmured. "I'll keep praying that God grants you many more days," she added, her voice trembling. In response, Mr. Harrington brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, saying softly, "I won't forget you, Rebecca. Thank you." With that, his grip loosened, and though her heart ached, she knew she must let him rest. That night, as the hospital corridors fell silent, Rebecca's sobs echoed softly in the hallway. Unable to contain her grief, she rushed to his room, only to find it empty, neatly tidied as if he had simply vanished. With trembling knees, she sank onto the bed and cradled a pillow, the weight of sorrow overwhelming her. Moments later, Sophie appeared behind her, wrapping her arms around Rebecca in a silent, supportive embrace. Despite Sophie's comforting presence, the pain of losing the man who had given her a father's love was almost too much to bear. In a final act of farewell, Rebecca attended Mr. Harrington's wake at his grand home. There, before a modest gathering of a few close friends, household staff, and his longtime driver, his white casket lay surrounded by pristine white flowers. Standing close, Rebecca's tears flowed freely as she remembered the solitary life he had led, a life now softened by the love they shared for one precious day. At the burial, with only a handful of mourners present, Rebecca's heart ached for the profound loneliness that had shadowed Mr. Harrington's final years. As the coffin was slowly lowered into the earth, she stood at the edge of the grave, letting her tears fall, each drop a silent testament to the bond they had forged. Though she knew their connection was but a fleeting illusion of familial love, the memories of that day would remain with her always. In the days that followed, as Rebecca returned to her duties with Sophie by her side, she recounted the beauty of that day with a radiant smile. "You wouldn't believe how wonderful yesterday was, Sophie. Mr. Harrington and I did so many things. I felt like his daughter," she shared, her voice a blend of joy and melancholy. Sophie's encouraging words lifted her spirits, even as the hospital buzzed with rumors. Soon, a vicious slander spread among the staff, accusing Rebecca of seducing Mr. Harrington for personal gain. Though the malicious tale stung, Sophie reassured her that the truth was all that mattered. One afternoon, while Rebecca organized medications in the stockroom, Sophie rushed in with news. "Rebecca, I found out who's been spreading those rumors," Sophie whispered urgently. "It was Tiffany. She admitted it to other nurses, and I even recorded what she said. She's been trying to get you kicked out because she despises you." Without hesitation, Rebecca confronted Tiffany. "Tiffany, we need to talk," she said calmly. Tiffany sneered. "I'd rather not talk to a woman who uses her charms to seduce a dying old man. You disgust me, Rebecca." "Is that what you believe?" Rebecca shot back, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare you twist my care for him into something so vile?" Tiffany retorted with a dismissive laugh, adding, "I've succeeded. People will believe my story, and soon you'll be gone, unless you're shameless enough to stay." Before the argument could escalate further, Miss Carter entered the stockroom, her gaze icy as she addressed Tiffany. "Tiffany, is it true that you're spreading these lies about Rebecca and Mr. Harrington?" Tiffany stammered, her fear evident as Sophie interjected, "Ms. Carter, I have proof that Tiffany fabricated everything to ruin Rebecca." Ms. Carter's disappointment and stern rebuke silenced Tiffany, leaving Rebecca with the knowledge that truth would prevail. Nurse Rebecca's final days at the hospital were marked by moments of bittersweet retribution, deep introspection, and a transformative journey through grief and vindication. One crisp morning, after a tumultuous confrontation in the stockroom, Miss Carter, the uncompromising head nurse, had firmly reprimanded Tiffany. "You've disgraced yourself, Tiffany," Miss Carter declared in a voice that brooked no argument. "I never imagined you would stoop so low. We do not tolerate this kind of behavior in our hospital. For all the skill you exhibit in your work, you have an equally appalling talent for slander. I promise you that disciplinary action will follow. This hospital is no place for spite or envy, Tiffany, regardless of our familial ties." With those final words, Miss Carter turned and strode away, leaving Tiffany scrambling after her. "Aunt, please, wait!" Tiffany cried, reaching out desperately, but Miss Carter shook her off with palpable disgust, leaving a silence that resonated deeply with Rebecca. As she stood there, Rebecca felt a mixture of sorrow and pity. Despite Tiffany finally receiving the consequences she deserved, Rebecca's heart was heavy with the realization that envy and hatred had so thoroughly consumed Tiffany's spirit. Later that day, on her day off, Rebecca found solace at Sophie's home, a quiet refuge where she could gather her thoughts. Sophie was away at the market with her mother, giving Rebecca a rare moment of peace. In that serene atmosphere, she reflected on the vindication of her good name, now cleared through Ms. Carter's decisive intervention. It was soon confirmed that Tiffany had been terminated from the hospital, a resolution that brought Rebecca some relief, even as her thoughts continually drifted back to Mr. Harrington. While sweeping the modest living room at Sophie's house, a firm knock startled Rebecca. Opening the door, she was met by a well-dressed man in a crisp white shirt, dark slacks, and polished dress shoes. "Good day. I'm attorney Robert Sandoval. Are you Ms. Rebecca Reyes?" he inquired formally. Puzzled, yet composed, Rebecca replied, "I am. How may I help you?" The attorney's tone was gentle yet authoritative as he asked if they could speak inside. Once seated in the quiet parlor, he opened a folder and laid out several documents before her. "I'm here to inform you that, according to Mr. Harrington's final will, you have been bequeathed a substantial portion of his estate." Rebecca's eyes widened in disbelief and a chill ran through her body. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" she stammered, scarcely able to grasp the magnitude of his words. Attorney Sandoval explained, "He has left you a large share of his assets, farmland in Montana, a vacation home in Colorado, and a considerable sum in the bank." Overwhelmed, Rebecca's first instinct was to refuse. "No, if that's true, I can't accept it," she protested. The lawyer offered a reassuring smile and handed her the documents. "I understand your hesitation, but you must know that Mr. Harrington thought this through. This was his way of repaying you for the compassion you showed him. A few days before his passing, he spoke often about how deeply you cared for him, not merely as his nurse, but because you truly possessed a generous heart. He wished for you to have these blessings so that his memory might live on in you," he explained softly. Rebecca clutched the papers, trying to process the reality that she was being entrusted with such a vast inheritance. The words of Mr. Harrington echoed in her mind, words that had once reassured her that those who put others first receive blessings beyond measure. A few days later, Rebecca visited the cemetery to pay her respects to Mr. Harrington. It was late afternoon and the setting sun cast a gentle glow over the peaceful grounds. Clutching a bouquet of vibrant tulips, his favorite flowers, she approached his gravestone and carefully read the marble inscription bearing his name. With a heavy sigh, she placed the bouquet on his grave and spoke softly. "Mr. Harrington, I am here to thank you. I never expected you would leave me such a tremendous blessing. At first, I felt unworthy, unable to accept the gift, but then I remembered your words, that those with a good heart receive blessings beyond their imagination. I am not sure if I am truly a good person, but I promise to use everything you've left me in the right way." Tears fell freely, yet they were now tears of gratitude mingled with the sorrow of loss. After a few moments, she gently wiped her eyes, pressed a light kiss to her palm, and touched it reverently to the headstone before turning and walking away. Despite the crushing grief of losing Mr. Harrington, the man who had, for a day, filled the void of a father's love in her life, Rebecca eventually returned to her work as a nurse with renewed determination. She resolved to honor his memory not only by cherishing the funds he had bestowed upon her, but by using them to forge a better future for herself and those she cared about. With part of the inheritance, she helped repay the generous family of her dear friend Sophie, who had supported her in moments of isolation. Furthermore, she invested in her own dreams by opening a small flower shop and a modest restaurant, enterprises that would provide her with both fulfillment and financial stability. She also purchased a house with ample land where her mother and siblings could finally live together in harmony. In the midst of building her new life, Rebecca never ceased to remember the invaluable lessons Mr. Harrington had imparted. She understood more clearly than ever that true riches were not measured by money, but by the kindness, love, and generosity one shared with others. The goodness a person shows can return in unexpected ways, a lesson that had been carved into her heart through every gentle word and every shared smile with him. Yet life at the hospital continued its relentless rhythm. Rumors soon began to circulate among the staff. A vicious slander that claimed Rebecca had used her body to seduce Mr. Harrington in exchange for preferential treatment. At first, the malicious whispers hurt Rebecca deeply, but Sophie's unwavering support reminded her that truth would ultimately prevail. One afternoon, while Rebecca was organizing medications in the stockroom, Sophie rushed in, her voice tight with indignation. "Rebecca, I found out who's been spreading those lies about you," she whispered urgently. It was Tiffany. I overheard her at the nurse's station, and I even recorded what she said. She confessed that she fabricated everything just to ruin your reputation. She's always wanted to see you kicked out of this hospital because she despises you. Without hesitation, Rebecca confronted Tiffany. "Tiffany, we need to talk," she said calmly, her eyes steady with resolve. Tiffany raised an eyebrow and sneered. "I'd rather not speak with someone who uses her charms to seduce a dying old man. You disgust me, Rebecca." The tension in the room was palpable as Rebecca's voice trembled with controlled anger. "How dare you? Did you really spread that rumor about Mr. Harrington and me? You know that is a lie. A lie meant only to tarnish my name," Tiffany retorted with a mocking laugh and pressed further. "It doesn't matter. I said I'd get you kicked out. And maybe you'll be so ashamed you'll quit, unless you're shameless enough to stay." At that moment, Miss Carter reappeared, her expression dark and her gaze piercing as she addressed Tiffany in no uncertain terms. "Tiffany, is it true what I have just heard? Are you indeed spreading false rumors about Rebecca and Mr. Harrington?" Tiffany stammered incoherently, and Sophie interjected. "Miss Carter, I have evidence." Tiffany admitted to fabricating the story because she's been trying to destroy Rebecca's reputation. "I recorded her, and you know how much she hates Rebecca." Miss Carter's eyes filled with disappointment as she fixed Tiffany with a final scornful look. "You have disgraced yourself, Tiffany. There will be consequences for this behavior," she stated firmly, before turning and leaving the room. In that final cascade of events, as the echoes of Miss Carter's words faded, Rebecca felt a profound mixture of relief and sorrow. Though the slander was vanquished, the pain of losing Mr. Harrington still loomed large. Yet through it all, she held on to the lessons he had taught her, lessons of compassion, resilience, and the immeasurable value of kindness. And so, in just a short span of time, a bond was formed, one that transcended blood, built instead on kindness, compassion, and the willingness to truly see someone for who they are. Rebecca entered Mr. Harrington's life as a nurse, but she left it as a daughter, and through her sincerity, she reminded us all of a simple truth, that sometimes the greatest blessings come not from wealth, but from love freely given and received. This story isn't just about loss, it's about connection, about the power of kindness to heal even the most broken hearts. It's a reminder that we never truly know how much of an impact we can have on someone's life just by being present, by being human. What about you? Have you ever experienced a bond that changed your life in an unexpected way? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your story, or simply tell us what part of Rebecca and Mr. Harrington's journey touched you the most. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because we have more real-life stories coming your way that will stir your heart and make you believe in the goodness of people again. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the quiet power of love.